Masvidal going to fight Burns. Now, there's some moving parts on that. Masvidal's going to fight Burns. Let that soak in. Let that set in. Of all the fights that you would have guessed, perhaps Burns was going to be booked in. Is that one? If that is one, where does that sit on your list? I mean, not only did you think this was going to happen? Not only for did you think this was going to happen, is this the one that you wanted to happen? I mean, you got to set that in just a little bit. Here would be the standpoint that I was coming from. I wanted something good to happen for Burns. I feel, and many times this happens in life, but we see it a lot in this business. When you are the guy who is willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do, many times the only reward you get for that is you get continued to be asked to do things that other guys aren't willing to do. I mean, it's just one of those things. I don't even know that that's bad. I can just tell you it's an observation. I can remember doing media, and I would go do the media, and it's a pain in the ass, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to do. You're in different time zones. I live in Oregon. They want something drive time in New York. You know, you're on the stations at 4 a.m., which means to get the sleep out of your voice, you're up at 3 a.m. It's just one of these things. But if you go and do that and you go and jump on that grenade, the reward is the next time there's drive time in New York, you get asked to do it again. It's one of those spots that I do. I watch Gilbert Burns go out and do fights. I watched him become a number one contender, get an opportunity to fight for a world championship, which was very wonderful to see. But he got there by taking fights, not only that were physically very difficult to do, that other guys were turning down, but he also did it at a pace, right? Do you guys remember that? I mean, Gilbert Burns was doing the Cowboy Cerrone. He was out there for every chance they had. He put 4 and 5 fights in the time frame that other guys, including the eventual champion he went and competed with, did 2 and 3 fights. So I want to see something good happen to Burns. But what do? I mean, what good can happen to a guy? You throw him on a pay-per-view, that's good. You give a prize fighter a fight and you give him a prize, that's good. You give him the BMF champion, you give him the second biggest draw in our entire industry, yeah, that's pretty damn good. Right? Are we all there? But I want you to just take a minute and think about this. I want you to do the same thing for Jorge Masvidal. I think a lot of us predicted. I don't know how bullish we were. Maybe I'm speaking for myself here. I don't know how much I actually would have bet or ventured to even guess that Masvidal was going to fight McGregor. But it was out there. Right? That was on the list. There's even some real quick conversation on The Ultimate Fighter. So, when you think about Burns, when you think about Masvidal, when you think about this fight, okay, everything that I just said, that all sounds good, right? That all sounds good. It's a co-main event. And we got to look at it from that perspective because that is very interesting. You have Burns, who is producing amongst the greatest matches that we've seen. He wants to fight for a championship. Now, if you're fighting on a pay-per-view and there's no belt up, you're typically not going to go into a main event spot. But let's just make sure we understand this. You then have Masvidal, who at one point was the sport's second biggest draw. That's a moving metric, right? I don't have the numbers to actually tell you that he still is, but he was the sport's second biggest draw. Now he's a co-main event. I mean, this is one of those spots where you don't just wake up and go, wow, this is a great fight. And then you go do the typical boring media and you talk about, the BMF title. Why don't we put up the BMF title? Right? Stop. You boys are in a really good fight. I think it's an important fight. I think it's a meaningful fight. You got 2 main eventers that got demoted to a co-main event. I mean, if you're in that spot, your eyes had better pop wide open this morning. Masvidal hasn't been booked in a meaningful amount of time. I remember his last fight. I was at it. T-Mobile, Las Vegas, opposite Colby Covington, which was a main event. As was Masvidal's fight before that, as was Masvidal's fight before that. You go to a co-main event, you don't wake up in a good spot. Now, I'm just sharing this for you, right? We can look forward to this fight, and I do, but there is another side to this. would have you predicted that? Would have you predicted the BMF champion, the second biggest draw in the sport, opposite Burns, who we want something good to happen to because we know he can beat anybody at any given moment, and he is due a good opportunity. Would you have predicted that they would have been demoted to a co-main event? And if so, what do you think about that? Is this the fight? Should they put the BMF belt up? Should this become a number one contender for Burns? It's just another thing that Burns has to do. Where do you go from here and where do you draw from here? Typically speaking, when you have a fight to the magnitude of two former number one contenders and they're going out there and they're going to fight, typically, they would do the best that they could do to get a conversation around that fight that it be identified and recognized as a potential number one contenders match. Now, we don't do a lot of number one contenders matches. We do some of them, but we don't do a lot of them. What we do a lot of is getting fights that are potentially identified. We don't get a lot further than that. This one could be the number one contenders fight. Okay, great. Let's potentially identify it. What do you think? What do you think? You got two big stars in a co-main event spot. If I wake up today and I see that match and I'm one of those participants, I thought I was going to be in there with Conor McGregor. I qualify to be in there for a world title, right? I'm combining both of their resumes. I haven't fought in a period of time. I've been nothing but main events. I'm a co-main event underneath two kickboxers. Cool. I'm going to put my shoes on. I'm going to go run. I'm going to go do everything else. But in the back of my mind, I realize this is not a career-making fight. This is not being identified as a number one contenders fight. This is a potential career-ending fight. You go from title fight to main event to co-main event. You keep going down the card. You go a couple more rungs, you're packing your bags. You're talking about the good old days like old Chael's doing. That's just his business. But that's still the spot that this is in. And it's a little bit of a surprise.